Abroad Pod with James Davis.
Hello, listener. Thank you so much for joining us on this, our 22nd episode of the Teaching Abroad Pod, coming at you on February 9th of 2022. I'm your host, James Davis, and with me this week is my co-host, Alex from the Oxford Seminars Job Placement Service. Alex, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I am doing wonderfully well too. This week, we're going to show the interview we did with Madeline Moon, who is the Wonder recruiter in South Korea. So really excited to show you all that. But before we get into that interview, Alex, we're very passionate about many things in Korea, but none more so than food. Do you have any particular highlights of Korean cuisine?
Yeah, Korean cuisine is obviously famously amazing, but it is quite different from a lot of other Asian cuisines. And I remember when I first went there, like my palate just wasn't ready for a really different flavor spectrum. So It took a little while to get used to the first time. And I have to say, I think the Korean flavors in Korea are quite a bit stronger than even some of the Korean food you might have tried outside of Korea. But some of my favorites were bibimbap, real classic, bokkeumbap, which is or kimchi bokkeumbap, fried rice. And of course, all the chigees, all the soups, kimchi jjigae, stuff like that. What about you?
So often I talk about my passion for very childish Korean food. In the interview with Madeline, I talk a bit about cheese rabokki,
right?
Which is kind of the traditional tteokbokki with the fish cake and the rice cakes and the spicy sauce. But then you just add some ramen, add some cheese, and it's heavenly. But I think I probably should highlight, the delicious soups and broths, the gamjatangs, and I actually can't remember the Korean word for it, but there's a goat soup that is also spectacular. Very similar to the typical beef bone soups that you get, but with that nice goaty flavor. I think the best one to highlight too is just jun, the pancakes.
Yeah.
There's nothing better than pancake and some glasses of makgeolli or some soju.
And I was just going to say that I'm a vegetarian, and so sometimes it's hard traveling and enjoying the food as a vegetarian, but a lot of Asian food is actually quite vegetarian friendly, and a lot of Asian food was traditionally or historically sometimes vegetarian, either when there wasn't that much meat, so meat would have been sort of a luxury, or sometimes for religious or faith spiritual reasons. There was a lot of, so I remember in Korea, there were a lot of dishes where you were there's not much meat in this, and this seems like this would have been traditionally probably a vegetarian dish with tofu or bean curd instead of meat. That's something Madeline kind of touched on a little bit in the interview, was that it's easier, I think, now for vegetarians in Korea than maybe in the past.
Yeah. I also think that's the wonderful thing about the explosion of Korean food in coming to the West as well, where, you get to experience the flavors and, that style of cooking, but they also will make those compensations for you. So, if I'm ordering kimchi jjigae, I can order it without any meat in it, and it's wonderful. So if anyone's been on the fence thinking about getting some Korean food, just do it, try it all. You will love it. So before we get into the interview with Madeline, we're just going to have a quick word from our sponsors. With Oxford Seminars, starting your new career teaching ESL couldn't be easier. Oxford Seminars has trained more than 70,000 teachers over the past 20 years, and you could be next. Their comprehensive 120-hour program starts with live instruction from an experienced ESL teacher, followed by convenient online modules. If your goal is to relocate overseas or even teach from the comfort of your own home, Oxford Seminars' renowned lifetime job placement service will get you where you want to be. You can call 1-800-779-1779 or visit oxfordseminars.com today to find out more. We are now very happy to be joined by Madeline Moon. Madeline is the founder of Teacher Tech Incorporated, which specializes in recruiting teachers for private schools in South Korea. Madeline has been a recruiter since 2001. She loves to get to know each and every one of the teachers that she places and wants to find them the right matching position With over 20 years of experience, she works hard to assist teachers from the beginning to the end of the whole placement process. Madeline, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me today.
So Korea is probably one of our most favorite topics on the Teaching Abroad pod. We maybe talk about Korea too much because we love it. We've all taught there, but it's really nice to get a different perspective on Korea from a recruiter. So I'm just wondering, how did you get started in this line of business?
Yeah, actually, I was an English teacher at one of these private school in Seoul in 2000. And I was actually planning to move to United States. And I told my director, I think is Mr. Che. And then I said, I'm moving to United States. And he actually suggested me to start this business once I move. So I first started in San Francisco, but now I'm located in Chicago. And I think shortly after I found my company, I was really fortunate to actually make the partnership with the Oxford Seminar. And I feel like we were on the journey together for the last 20 years. And, Oxford Seminar has grown so much bigger compared to when I first just, working with them. And I visited actually twice Oxford Seminar when my daughter was 6 months old and 3 years old. And my daughter's actually a sophomore in college. Yeah, I love our partnership, and I really want to continue to work well with Oxford Seminar.
Well, I think you're one of our oldest partners in terms of the amount of time that we've worked with you, and one of the best for sure.
Thank you.
So you mentioned you were an English teacher in Korea before. So was that your educational background? Were you trained to be a teacher, or did you just learn English really well and realized you could teach it?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. I actually majored Chinese in college because actually I was pretty good at English in high school. I loved English. I'm one of those person who don't mind like memorize 10 vocabulary a day or something. So I was pretty good. So actually I tried to be trilingual. So I choose Chinese and go study Chinese. But today I don't speak Chinese, so I failed. But after graduate, with my English skill, I was fortunate to get a job with like a Japanese company, an Australian company. But then, again, I was such interested in English and everything. I felt like I was very good at it. There was like a program that it caught my attention. I think it was really first TESOL program in Korea. Before this program, people didn't even know what is TESOL in Korea. So that program really caught my attention. It was like a joint program with Madeline University. So I actually signed up. I got the certificate. It was a 6-month course. I studied with actually native professor who came from the United States. And then after the certification, I started my teaching career in mid-20. So I had some teaching experience before I become recruiter. I think it really helped me, after I become a recruiter. So I have an experience teaching from kinder age to high school age students in Korea.
With the founding of Teacher Tech Incorporated, you mentioned that it was your old boss who kind of suggested that perhaps this might be the way to go. Was that to do with the timing around 2000, 2001? Was that a particularly good time to get into recruitment?
I think so, definitely. But like I say, I don't think I saw that, but the director, I think he could see much bigger picture. And I owe him a lot because he really gave me 20 years of career. He basically told me, you will be good at it and this will be great. There will be huge demand. Nobody's doing it. That's what he also said, because it was very difficult to recruit a teacher at the time. Like they basically have to beg your teacher, do you have a sister? Do you have a friend? Send somebody here, because there was really nobody who's doing professionally. So, if you really think about the history of these private school, people really surprised when I told this story. Before 2000, like again, when I was in college, I mean, there wasn't any school, any private school that you can learn English with a native speaker as a children. 2000, 2001, this was really beginning of the private school that teaching English with children. So it was really, everything was really beginning. I feel like when I was first to start recruiting teachers, I get a lot of like a new school. Oh, I'm opening a new school. Can you help me? So actually there are a lot of school that I'm still working for as today that I basically help them to open the school. I send them a first teacher. So now a lot of my schools are 20 years old, 18 years old, and we have that long lasting relationship, but they really opened it up first their school in early 2000. And then another interesting, it sounds really strange, but if you think about 2000, even internet was relatively new. And then online recruiting was just starting. So even those technology helped me to recruit a teacher from all over from North America. Otherwise, without technology, we couldn't do it. So I feel I'm very fortunate to, start my career at the very beginning of all these happening. Yeah.
So since that time, has it been a steady increase in the industry, in demand for teachers and in more teachers wanting to go teach in Korea?
I think that's actually a very good question. Um, you know, because I have a 20 years experience, I kind of experienced the change and maturity of the market. I think at first it was just crazy, like I say. And then school didn't know how to really, like organize when they need to start looking for new teacher. Like I will get a call and say, can you send me somebody in 2 weeks? And so, yeah, the demand, I think at first was definitely actually much larger, but chaotic. And then school also didn't know how to manage the teachers. So there was a lot of also problems, but again, I navigate everything. I was very fortunate to meet a really good directors. So they really care about the, teachers and then we kind of learn through our mistakes. So now actually Korea, I think very mature market. So we are looking for teacher in a certain time in advance. So we can find a better teacher and better planning and we can treat them better. And I'm always, guide everybody to find exactly what they're getting into, show them they can talk to current teachers. But I think South Korea, as far as overall market, is very healthy. A lot of management understand how to treat the native speaker, like a communication. They kind of know, what kind of communication they have to really make native speaker comfortable. So even compared to maybe, Alex and James taught in South Korea, I think now it's even more comfortable time to go to Korea to teach. Yeah.
I'm just wondering that you talk about, people have to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that is the advantage of using a recruiter? When I went through the process, I had a recruiter too, and she really, held my hand. And it's nice to have someone on your side when you're going through that process. Is that how you feel about that process? That it's better to have a recruiter than not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, I'm especially good one. I don't
Mhm.
want to brag myself, but the thing is, this is actually very, in a way, fast-paced process.
Mhm.
School really actually wants you to make the decision in a week or two. So let's say if you don't navigate with the recruiter, you might actually miss out the job that you're supposed to go. So in my case, like like you introduced me, I really like to get to know the teacher, like what age group, what they're trying to get out from this opportunity depends on even their level of teaching interest. They can go different place. So I get to know them and I match them a right place. And then and then even if you do a lot of research, it's very confusing. And there are people sometimes put wrong information, wrong guide. So I try to really, guide and show clearly so they can feel very confident. I think if you don't have that confidence, what happens is also when you arrive in Korea, you wonder, oh, I didn't come to the right place. And then you dissatisfied and then you don't ended up successful. So definitely recruiters is definitely can help, especially if you meet the experienced and knowledgeable recruiter. Otherwise it's difficult to apply on your own. There's not a lot of school who's gonna look for teachers directly. So you definitely need a recruiter and you can do a lot for yourself, but if you meet a good recruiter, they can guide you very, very well.
Well, we're really lucky to have you on. So now we can ask you some a couple specific questions that I'm sure a lot of people want to ask you when they're starting their application. So what about the timing? When do you recommend that teachers start their job applications for Korea?
Yeah, that's actually a very simple question, but I think it's very important because whenever I get a resume, sometimes some people say, I want to go ASP, I'm ready. Can I go next month? And then I told them, well, we're going to go 3 months later, 4 months later. They get disappointed. It's best if you can actually apply almost 3 to 6 months in advance. Yeah. And also you really need to know, as I mentioned it earlier, South Korea market really mature. There are still information out there saying, oh, South Korea hires teacher all the time. That's a yes or no. If you dig everywhere, you might find a job somewhere every month. But technically, we really only have a 4 times a hiring months in a year: March 1st, June 1st, September 1st, December 1st. So you want to hire 3 to 6 months in advance from these starting hiring months. Yeah.
And is that extended because of the last 2 years, because of COVID, or is that just been the trend now that it's less chaotic in the hiring market and you just need to take a little bit more time?
It's both.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely COVID extended more, especially like a March 1st, September 1st, there's huge demand. So there's no way we can actually find everybody we need just in 2 months or 3 months if we started. So we actually really start almost 6 months, 5 months. But then, I always want to start early, but then sometimes school doesn't. But then because of a COVID, we have to go now like a half month in advance. And then paperwork takes much longer, especially for Canadian during COVID. So yes, COVID definitely made even more, but the trend was definitely going in the direction that we are looking for teacher much more in advance, and teacher need to be prepared much more in advance. Yeah.
So we all know that, well, all of us who've taught overseas, which I think is everybody here, but we know it can be a really life-changing experience to go overseas, to teach overseas, to live or work there. So in your experience, do you have any stories that you've heard from teachers after their teaching experience in Korea that maybe it changed their life in one way or another?
Yes, definitely. I mean, I don't get to hear all of it. I wish I do. People send me email a lot while they're in Korea, how much they enjoy, how much they like the school, but they don't necessarily contact me, 5 years later when they come back. But I got to know some of the story personally. I want to say actually 2 different stories. There's 3 teachers involved in this story, all Oxford Seminar graduate. The first one is mainly professionally. I placed him in a school in Incheon and he worked there 2 years. And then he came back United States. I kind of have to help him for his reference letter together with the director. So that's how I got to know him. He said due to his experience from Korea, he got into really good master's program that he wanted to go. He really felt like the experience really helped him. And then even after graduate MA program, he said the first job he got, which I and my director helped him to write the reference letter, he again got a pretty good job. So the teaching experience in Korea really helped him, education and the career. The last time I spoke to him, he said he was getting a really great job with the FBI. And he actually wrote a blog in my website, what kind of a skill you can learn that can transfer to job market in the United States. So I want people to think about also, this experience is not just your personal, just journey. It can be really transform your professional life. And then my second story is even sweeter story. Yeah. So she and I kind of connected each other really well, even when I was placing her, because she was from Chicago and I was located in Chicago. So I found her job in Seoul. She worked there 3 years. She came back and she let me know, hey, Madeline, I signed up MA program in education program in Chicago. I want to become a teacher. That's very cool, right? So, okay, that sounds great. And then we kind of lost in contact. But last month, actually, I contacted her. She told me now she become teacher. She's a math teacher in Chicago. And then she's getting married this summer. But the fiance is the person also, I placed him at the same school where she worked. So they met each other at the school that I placed them together. He's from Baltimore. He moved back to Chicago. Again, they're getting married this summer. So I'm officially matchmaker. And think about what you could do if you go to Korea or what can happen to you. Yeah.
You'll have to put Cupid at the end of your emails now.
Yeah, I just loved her story so much. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic, Madeline. You've mentioned a couple of kind of bigger cities, you know, Seoul, Incheon. I myself taught in Iksan in Jeollabuk-do, which is a very kind of small city compared to those. Do you have any preference about working with schools in certain areas, or what do you tell your teachers to consider when trying to pick a location?
So many people basically tell me like, oh, I don't want to be isolated, so I want to be located in Seoul. There's so many cities in between, right? The biggest thing is I want people to know that you can be comfortable in Korea in small cities. You don't have to be in the big city. However, there are some people, they just really, you know, thrive by busy, crowded. They just want to experience really living in the big city. Then, you know, I do my best to find people job in Seoul and Busan, but it can be difficult sometimes. You really focus just location. What can happen is you may end up in the position that actually doesn't match the other stuff, age group or the working hours. You know, again, I don't mind if people have some preference, but I want people to be a little bit flexible, open-minded, and again, definitely knowing the smaller cities in Korea, they're all connected. Like, you know, United States and Canada, it's such a big country. You can be definitely isolated. But in Korea, it's almost impossible to be isolated, even if you want to. And then even the smallest size of city that I'm working for is 500,000 size. It's still, yeah, I think you will say, Iksan, you wasn't boring. You will say you probably had a still very urban-like lifestyle, especially now, more than when you're there. There's such a like a local festival, you know, a lot of interesting. And I think actually you get to experience more deep Korean culture because I feel like Seoul, Chicago, there's a lot more common as a big city. But if you go a little bit smaller city, even the native speaker community, they're more connected to each other because the number of teachers are, I mean, there are enough. Again, you're never going to be isolated, but people are connected more each other because it's not an overwhelming number of native speaker teachers like in Seoul and Busan. And then you can even learn Korean at the city hall, much cheaper, easier, people more willing to speak Korean. So you can actually look for getting different type of experience when you open-minded and going to different cities. So think about also what you like, not what other people wrote in the blog or YouTube. You need to find your matching. My big word is always matching. City have to match, school have to match, even you and the director dynamic have to be matched. It's not, there's not one formula. Yeah.
I 100% agree. People would say to me, oh, you've lived in such a small city, but it's still amazing. Like,
I know.
I stayed in Iksan for over 5 years and I wouldn't want to leave. I didn't really want to leave. It was a wonderful place.
Good, good.
And there are so many benefits to a smaller city.
I agree. You know, again, if you're flexible, you'll be able to find the right school, right location, and you will not be disappointed, you know, just like your experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice because just because you might be in the location you want, if you're not happy at your job,
right,
it's still not going to be a positive experience. So
No.
you really want to be happy with everything, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, so we've talked a lot about teaching in Korea and how it's such a popular teaching destination. And you've talked about how the industry has grown and matured along with that, and that's helped that popularity. But another thing that I'm thinking maybe is part of a factor is just the rise of pop culture and how, you know,
Yeah.
how much Korean culture has entered pop culture
Yes.
and music and all the famous ways. And food is a big part of that. So
Yes.
tell us a little bit about Korean food, and do you have any favorite dishes or dishes you recommend?
Yes. I mean, it's crazy. First, talk about a little bit of the pop culture. Like when I growing up, did I even again imagining this is going to happen? People's gonna watch Korean TV drama in the United States, like a Squid Game, Parasite, like you name it, like So yeah, that's just really crazy. And I feel like just being Korean is kind of almost a hip right now. And then yeah, the Korean dishes, I mean, there's so many, obviously, and but I haven't been to Korea for a few years, and seems like there's like a lot of even new kind of food, like a lot of it with like cheese, and like even tteokbokki is melted with cheese, ramen with melted with cheese, corn dog, hot dog with the melted cheese. I think those are kind of new things that people craze about it.
Yeah.
But I have to say, probably, even though I grew up in Seoul my whole life, but my father's from Incheon, which is like a kind of coastal city. So he's a really big fan of like seafood. Yeah. So one of the things I think definitely should try is, by the coastal side, they catch the fresh fish and then they will cook everything. You start with the sashimi and then they will cook the soup and, so everything. I think that's very unique and really, tasty and something different. Like you got to see fishy eyes, which I know a lot of Westerners don't prefer to do that. We cook very different than, fish that cooks in Western cuisine. Yeah, so I think seafood is definitely something. But then even pizza, even Vietnamese food, Japanese food. I mean, even those, I actually felt like the best pizza I had is in Korea. Some ways, because I think we kind of make it that how we like it. Yeah. So, I mean, I think of food, there's so many different flavors, so many dishes you can try, and you can find things you like. Even if you're not a big fan of spicy, there's plenty choices. Even if these days a lot of people are actually vegetarian, gluten-free. I mean, Korean food can be very vegetarian friendly, gluten-free friendly, because we don't really eat bread as a, basic food. Yeah. But actually my favorite food is really dumpling.
Yeah, I feel embarrassed because one of my favorite things is what you talked about at the beginning, and it's cheese rabokki, which is, it's very childish, but it's so delicious.
Yeah.
I love it. Again, we just have one final question for you, Madeline, kind of going back to teaching and what you do. So do you have any advice for someone who's thinking right now, I might like to go to Korea?
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell them? What should they be doing?
I mean, there's a lot of advice, depends on what angle you give them.
Yeah.
I want people to really think about what they want to get out from this opportunity. It can be both sides, personal and the professional. And personal can be, different for everybody, so they can think about it. But I want to focus professional side. Even if you're not going to become a lifelong teacher, I really think there's a lot you can gain from this opportunity professionally. And when you actually have some goal professionally, you're more likely also succeed, because it's not like you're going to travel all the time eating Korean food, just having fun all the time in Korea, right? That's an amazing part of this opportunity. But you're going to spend Monday to Friday, 8 hours a day working. That's most of your day. So you got to be successful at this job to actually enjoy the rest of your personal time. So, again, even if you're not going to become a teacher, you want to have some kind of think about connection, what you want to do in the future. Then what kind of skill set, if you gain it, that will benefit later your job application or even interview. I think there's big difference when you have an interview. When you've done a successful job, you're going to be a very different person, that very different candidate to answer the question that interviewer asking. Yeah, so I really like people to guide professionally and then make sure they're focused, and then they can be successful at it. because that's when you really have a positive experience overall, all together with the time that you're spending in Korea. So be positive, flexible, open-minded, and work with a good recruiter. You will find the right job and you are going to have an amazing experience. I mean, it may not transfer your life, but think about if you have a good story, you can share the story rest of your life with friends and family, your children, your grandchildren. You've been to Korea. It's an amazing opportunity, amazing chance to be successful. So again, I want people to focus to what you really want to get most out of from this opportunity.
Wow.
Oh,
Well
Thank
done.
you. Thank you so
Thank you.
much, Madeline, for taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it. Wonderful insight into kind of all aspects of teaching in Korea. So thank you so much.
no, thank you for inviting me here. I'm very happy to do this. It's really exciting and fun to share. Yeah.
I hope we can have you back on because I feel like we just scratched the surface talking about Korea.
I would love to.
Great.
Okay, thank you so much again to Madeline for taking the time to speak to us. What a wonderful guest, and it's so good to have that different perspective on teaching in Korea. Before we let our listeners go, Alex, do you have an update from the job placement service?
Yeah, kind of an update, kind of another, not a dire warning, but something to consider when you're applying to Korea. I guess in episode 21 with Ross Rabagliati, the issue of cannabis use came up. And for Korea, as with most countries overseas, you are required to get a health check or a medical check as part of your visa application. And it's usually sort of one of the last stages of your visa application process, or sometimes it's for your resident card process. And it's usually done once you're in the country. So it really depends on the country you're going to, what kind of medical or health check they're going to require and what they're going to check, what they're going to test for. For example, I remember in Taiwan, I actually had to get a rubella vaccine. So since we're talking about Korea today, for Korea, it's a two-step health check process. One is an online health statement, a questionnaire that's a self-reported questionnaire. Okay, and then the second check is the actual doctor's check, where the doctor is basically going to give you a physical check and also ask you some questions to cross-reference what you stated in your self questionnaire. So the physical check for Korea, for example, will include a blood sample, urine sample, chest x-ray, and the doctor Q&A. These tests will check for contagious ailments and illicit substances in your system, such as narcotics. So even though you may be coming from a country where something like cannabis is legal or decriminalized, in Korea, it's still not. It's decriminalized for medical use, but it's not decriminalized for recreational use. So it's important to realize this and to think about this. If you are using a substance like that, that might show up on those tests, the idea would be to stop using it, well in advance of going to Korea. But another thing to consider is if you are someone who uses something like cannabis, like consider the fact that it isn't legal in Korea, and just even aside from the health check, how is that going to impact your day-to-day life? How much do you use it? Do you think you'll be able to function well and be happy without it? Yeah, so it's kind of a tricky issue, but I think it's something that people need to be aware of. And remember to just do your research, check on the health check before you leave, depending on the country you're going to, what's going to be required, and at least knowing about it in advance, you'll be prepared for it when the time comes.
It was wonderful. Thank you very much for that update, Alex. I think that really highlights the benefit of having your placement service and using a recruiter like Madeline. Is some of these things do seem very scary, but you guys are there to talk people through these various steps.
Yeah, and just point people in the direction of the right resources, because it's great. We have the internet now, so it's a lot less scary than it used to be. You can definitely have a lot more information than probably when we started off teaching abroad. It was a lot more jumping into the unknown. So that's a good thing, but you still need to, sometimes you need a little guidance to find those resources and find the right resources.
Apologize if anyone can hear a husky howling on this podcast. That is my next door neighbor. But with that note, thank you very much, listener, for tuning in to the Teaching Abroad pod. We'll be releasing new episodes every other Wednesday. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like and subscribe and share it with your friends. Remember, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, pretty much anywhere you can find a good podcast. If you have any great ideas you'd like to hear us discuss in an upcoming episode, let us know. Send an email to teachingabroad@oxfordseminars.com or hit up Oxford Seminars on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. Have a wonderful rest of your day.